Hi, I'm Justin Gosman. I'm the host of Suede Reviews, and we are now going through the second half of the RCA albums box set collection that just came out earlier this year, and we're working our way up to August 16th, 2016, the anniversary of Elvis's death. Where we left off was Clam Bake. But thankfully, after the mess of the LPs of the movie soundtracks, we actually have a nice run of albums that many fans and music critics would arguably say are the best of his career. And I would actually start with Elvis's Golden Records Volume 4, which is the 30th LP in the box set. And this is kind of even though all of his Gold Records albums have sold extremely well throughout the years, I would actually say that Volume 4 is not as well known as the other three. There are some songs on here that I think most casual fans would not necessarily immediately think of. I mean, there are some obvious ones, like You're the Devil in Disguise and It Hurts Me. It's actually the master of It Hurts Me, not the 68 comeback special version, but the rest of these are surprisingly not that well known song-wise. Lonely Man was deleted from Wild in the Country, is on here. Just Tell Her Jim Said Hello, A Mess of Blues, which was a single from around the time of Elvis is Back. Please Don't Drag That String Around. I mean, nobody would think of that necessarily right off the top of your head as you know, like if someone said, you know, what Elvis's Golden Records, Indescribably Blue, Ask Me, Witchcraft wouldn't all necessarily be the first ones that spring to mind. So it's fascinating. This one is, in particular, probably my favorite of the Golden Records series, because the songs are a little more obscure, but they're just as well performed. In particular, I really do like Indescribably Blue. It's interesting, though, that the songs on here span a pretty wide span of time, because it's the earliest on here is actually Ain't That Loving You Baby, which he would have recorded in 1959, and this didn't come out until 1967, I believe. So almost 10 years, not quite 8, but then it goes all the way to something more contemporary, like Love Letters or Devil in Disguise, which at the time of this would have been, you know, 2 or 3, 4 years removed at the most. The cool thing about this version of the bonus, or of the RCA albums collection, is that there are bonus tracks on a lot of these albums. And in fact, I have a version of this on vinyl that's a re-release that has some of those same bonus tracks, including Viva Las Vegas, which is on this version but wasn't on the original track list. It was originally on an EP. The movie had an extended play as opposed to an LP, and that's something that actually I found has confused a lot of newer fans, or fans who have kind of come into being an Elvis fan here in the 21st century, and weren't around at the time, because we've always been familiar with being able to have all the songs from Viva Las Vegas together at once on one CD. Like, I've got the soundtrack that Sony put out a few years ago that has all the songs from the movie and a few of the bonus ones, like You're the Boss and Do the Vega, a couple of those other ones that got cut from the movie. But until the 90s, the only place that you would have been able to get Viva Las Vegas songs were the EP. So but it appears on the box set version of, there goes the CD. It appears on the box set version of Elvis's Golden Records 4, and also on the most recent vinyl reissue. I'm not sure actually what year the reissue came out, but it was fairly recently. Otherwise, this is it's not a bad album. Like I said, it's my favorite. It's not the first one that comes to people's minds. There is a Golden Records Volume 5 that's not actually included in this box set, that was issued in the 70s. And it's kind of disappointing, but I understand why they did it, because by the time we got to the 70s, a lot of these were actually released on either EPs or singles, and this is the first time that they appeared on an album. And by the time you got to the 70s, all of the songs that were appearing on singles were now also appearing on albums. And that's one thing that's fascinating about Elvis's career, is that he came about during that shift in how artists developed an album, or how recording studios or record companies compiled an album. Because back in the day, you would have your single, which would be a two-sided, either a 78 or a 45, with if it was an EP, it would probably have two songs on each side, a single, one song on each side. And then those would not be available on an LP until you had a compilation album, like a Golden Records, or if they didn't go gold, then just some sort of compilation. And actually, there's a fascinating bit. Before I go any further, this book that comes with this collection is actually really, really well produced, and the fellow who wrote the intro, John Jackson, who, if I remember correctly, was the first person to get a degree in rock and roll. He talks about the history of albums and why that's significant to Elvis's albums. And I had actually, just before I picked this up, I had actually just learned the history of record albums and why they're actually called albums. In case people don't know, because I had gone almost 30 years without knowing. I'm 27 and I only just found out. They're called albums. Let me just read an excerpt here. Albums were originally a physical collection of individual two-song records, usually on 78 RPM shellac discs that people would either collect themselves or purchase as a standalone item in an ornate binder. And these albums were incredibly popular throughout the 1930s and 40s, but were limited to the one song at a time experience that each side of a 78 could physically hold. One example of a successful album, The Voice of Frank Sinatra, from 1946, was originally 8 songs on 4 78 RPM discs, sold in a custom-printed binder and weighing around 5 pounds. It's virtually impossible to imagine in today's digital universe that recordings were ever so cumbersome to experience. And so that's the history of why they're actually called albums, because they were originally physical albums of discs. So that's one of the cool things about going through Elvis's albums here, is that you actually also get a little bit of the history of the recording industry throughout kind of the transition from the early 20th century to the mid to late 20th century, because there's a huge shift. But as far as Elvis's Golden Records 4, if you haven't heard this one before, if you don't have a copy of it, I would definitely recommend checking it out, because, like I said, there are a few of these songs that in particular are not as well known, despite having been gold records. They're not as ubiquitous as like his #1 hits are, or even his top 10 hits. So definitely check this one out. There's some good material on this album.